program. Let me thank CESRAN and the university here for having me. And a little bit about why I chose this topic. I work on Indo-Pacific and on ASEAN and on geopolitics of the region. Um, the idea of regional autonomy and regionalism, especially in a region like Southeast Asia, which was in the Cold War quite divided, and economically gained momentum, the idea of regional autonomy and centrality is very key. Um, Starting from the keynote, what I did observe is that everybody agrees that there is a trade difference or trade war, if we can call it, between the United States and China. And no other region where it's manifested so strongly as in Southeast Asia, right? So, because these economies are very interdependent on security and economic matters on either of them or split between both of them. So, it makes very interesting for a case to pick the ASEAN countries to look at. Um, First and foremost, pardon me for cutting off half of the map because I can't show a wrong map of my country, so I had to crop it a little bit. But this is from the publicly available sources. So, what is exactly the Indo-Pacific, which we talk about today? So as you can see that we are very accustomed to hearing about the term Asia Pacific. In literature, Asia Pacific emerged as an economic region consisting of the countries which are shaded in orange over here, as you can see. And today, what we talk about the Indo Pacific is not one cohesive region, but I can break it down into three different aspects. One is, of course, the geographical Indo Pacific, which is showcased here with the dotted lines, as you can see on the outline of this map, in red in color, stretching from the west coast of the United States right up till the east coast of Africa. And nearly it's defined by all of these four countries, mainly which talk about the Indo Pacific in today's day and age, which is India, the United States, Japan, and Australia. And of course, certain European countries also have an Indo Pacific strategy and outlook in which they define this region, namely, the European Union has one, Germany has one, and France has one strategy. Of course, the other contra region is the economic Indo Pacific region, right? So, what is the difference between, if you say, the geographical and the economic? Is that the geographical context plus the economic construct, which we talk about, which is floated around by what we today know as the Indo Pacific Economic Framework or the IPEF, which goes contrary to the China centric idea of the Asia Pacific. And then, of course, there is the geopolitical Indo Pacific region. So, what exactly is the geopolitical Indo Pacific region? It's defined by an economic and structural cooperation between these particular countries. And the structure is security wise centered on what we term as the Quad, the four countries which have defined the Indo Pacific, that is, India, the United States, Japan, and Australia. And also the regional capacity building strategies which they implement, and also the supply chain diversifications. So, put together, the geopolitics of the Indo Pacific is defined by these particular actors. So, over a point of time, if we see historically, the premise of peace in this particular Asia Pacific or the Indo Pacific region was largely defined on a stable trading relationship which was there between major economies, which is the ASEAN countries, with the major powers, the United States and China, when there was much of a stability and China was growing as a power, right? And of course, all of this was centrally premised on the idea of the security umbrella of the United States, which it was providing in the Asia Pacific region through its alliance systems. Now, of course, when we talk about multilateralism, it was characterized largely by regional institutions and organizations with a standardized set of norms of behavior, which meant it was centric on ASEAN and ASEAN centrality and the norms. And these norms were diffused to other partners through the relationships which they had with the organizational structures. And of course, with what we term as the era of the rise of China or the Asian century, we see that there is a slow change in the status quo. This starts with the early part of 2000s when the Chinese openly write in the Foreign Policy magazine about China's peaceful rise, right? So when we talk about China's peaceful rise, it has to be countered by someone or something, which comes out with the United States talking about rebalancing to the Asia Pacific. And of course, then comes the concept of the Indo Pacific. And then, of course, today we see that there is a confrontation and there is a China threat in this particular region. So, where is ASEAN in the midst of this? And it is worthwhile exploring where we look at ASEAN and its normative culture. So, what exactly is its normative culture? Like any other regional organization or regional grouping, it has a certain set of norms of behavior based on which it functions, right? So, every single time, if you ask someone from Europe, they would say that it's an ineffective organization which doesn't work. To some extent, it does, some extent, it doesn't. I don't belong to either of the regions, so I can very safely say this. And when we look at ASEAN, the set of norms which are codified within the organizational framework relies on these particular issues. One, of course, is consensus based decision making, which means that until a decision is arrived on, there is no outcome, right? There is no voting. That is the final thing. Informal diplomacy, non interference, and also respect of sovereignty and what we term as ASEAN centrality. And these norms of behavior are codified through something known as the ASEAN Charter. Now, the idea of ASEAN centrality, which makes regional autonomy a very important aspect, becomes very key focus over here. So, the notion here is that ASEAN as an organization should be in the driver's seat of most of the regional multilateral initiatives. And most organizations emerged in the Asia Pacific with a central component of ASEAN's functioning, which means the ASEAN Plus frameworks. We see that whenever there is an ASEAN summit, we have the ASEAN Plus 1, Plus 3, Plus 5, Plus 6. And then there is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, the East Asia Summit, and then the final Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which was built on this particular structure. So the preference for normative acceptance of the organization's functioning was centered on this premise of peace of ASEAN's non-problematic stance with other countries. So just to give you an example, if you take the ASEAN Regional Forum, which is a security dialogue forum within the ASEAN mechanism, North Korea is a part of it. So if you look at it in another way, then you see that China and India are part of different dialogue partnerships with ASEAN. So as long as there was a stable peace within Southeast Asia and these countries were acceptable to all the other dialogue partners, it was possible to have this type of a mechanism in place. Now, what happens when a trade war emerges between two of its largest trading partners, which is split between different countries? And that's where the idea of weaponized interdependence comes into play. Of course, the more popular understanding, and what David also mentioned in his presentation, is that the idea of complex interdependence and that high level of mutual dependencies will prevent countries from going towards conflict or war has worked in a lot of regions around the world. Where we are is the perfect example of how this type of dependencies develop over a point of time and war becomes unimaginable. But the complex network or the dependencies that are there in Asia, in Southeast Asia in specific, are very much different from the reality of what we see in Europe. So when we talk about weaponized interdependence, it is basically the strategic use of interconnectedness which we see and the reliance between different actors and often states, which gain a coercive advantage over other countries. So within this context, we have several examples to see how the economic advantage, let's say, that China has with Southeast Asian countries is used to coerce at certain points of time. So, what are the asymmetrical disadvantages to multilateralism in the Indo-Pacific, right? So, what exactly is the current Indo-Pacific? One, of course, we see that it's a largely major power-driven concept, right? It's defined by certain countries, which are large countries, which have certain security perspectives in place. And also security structures and economic structures assume a certain type of cooperation will happen. It should happen minus certain countries. It should have certain countries in place, right? So it's not a completely coercive concept. And it also re-examines a certain system, existing system of multilateralism in the Indo-Pacific. So is it time to then address the elephant in the room? Of course. Till now, we see that if you look at this particular image over here, uh, everything is red. So why is this red? Because even though the Indo-Pacific strives to build an alternative structure to what China has as an advantage in this particular region, we see that all these countries in red depend on China, or China is the largest trading partner of all of them. So how do you build a system which is exclusive of China but still dependent on it, which is the biggest dilemma which most of this understanding faces. So when we look at the contemporary international relations in the Indo-Pacific, where do we look at it right now? One is, of course, there is competitive regionalism, right? So there is the Indo-Pacific conceptualization, and then there is the idea of China and its vision for the Indo-Pacific or the Asia-Pacific region. It very openly does not accept this particular term of the Indo-Pacific, dismisses it as an anti-China coalition. This is an official statement. And the increased use of trade as an influencing factor in exercising influence within this region has been growing a lot. Whether it's China using its economic influence, which it has with disputants in the South China Sea. This has happened with the Philippines, for example, where economic might has been used multiple times to make the Philippines amend its ways about confronting China about its security threats in the South China Sea. The use of multilateral financial institutions. So, for example, if you look at whether it's the Asian Development Bank or the Asian AIIB, which is the financial institution of the BRICS countries, you see that several of these decisions also most of the times are dependent on how the diplomatic relations or the geopolitical relations are between these countries. And this often leads to a disrupting regional organizational practice and failure of regional processes. So, for example, intra-ASEAN cooperation has multiple times failed due to this type of an external pressure or the relation which certain countries have with external partners such as China. So we see a disruption in the regional trade order. Started with the US-China trade war and technology competition, where sanctions completely wrecked supply chains. Supply chains diversification led to different type of initiatives and coalition building, which worked over here, and withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership by the United States. United States and India not signing the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and the formation of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So here we see that there are certain geopolitical issues based on which regional order has been disrupted. And also the delay and politicization of the RCEP remains one of the major factors for a non-comprehensive regional trade agreement. So the question that I wanted to just leave the audience here is that is ASEAN and Asia-Pacific regionalism relevant in the Indo-Pacific era? And some concluding observations before I wrap up. I would like to say one, of course, is that multilateralism is at an inflection point in the Indo-Pacific. Do we really think about the survival of multilateral institutions within a certain old order? Or are we thinking about an order in which countries which are on neither side have to pick sides? The second, the scope of disruptions have now beholden these countries to major power politics. So, for instance, when we look at ASEAN, we see that it needs to choose one side or the other. It's no more central. So that is the reason why this organization was created, so that it doesn't get split between this type of major power politics between countries. And finally, when we look at these interdependent relationships, they require a certain type of a deeper scrutiny to avoid falling into these economic traps of major power competitions. So thank you. That would be it from my side. I can take some questions.
Thank you very much.